The Friday evening crowd at Rosie's diner was busier than usual. Sarah Martinez wiped down the counter for the third time that hour, her eyes scanning the packed restaurant. She had been working as a waitress here for 6 months now, ever since her husband Jake deployed overseas with his Navy SEAL team. The job helped her stay busy and brought in extra income while he was away serving their country. Sarah loved the friendly atmosphere at Rosie's. Most customers were regulars who knew her story and always asked about Jake. Mrs. Henderson from Table 4 would show her pictures of her grandson. The truck drivers who stopped by during their long hauls always left generous tips and shared stories from the road. Even the teenagers who came in after school games were polite and respectful. But tonight felt different. A man in his late 30s had been sitting alone in booth 7 for over 2 hours. He ordered very little food, but kept requesting more coffee, which meant Sarah had to visit his table frequently. Each time she approached, his eyes would follow her movements in a way that made her skin crawl. His stare was intense and unwelcoming, completely different from the friendly glances she was used to receiving from other customers. The man had slicked back dark hair and wore an expensive-looking suit that seemed out of place in the casual diner. His cologne was so strong that Sarah could smell it from several feet away. When she first took his order, he had tried to grab her wrist, claiming he needed help reading the menu in the dim light. Sarah had quickly pulled her hand away and offered to turn on the booth light instead. Since then, his behavior had only gotten worse. Every time Sarah walked past his booth, he would make comments about her appearance. He told her she had beautiful eyes, that her smile was captivating, and that she must be lonely working late nights. Sarah tried to remain professional, giving short responses and keeping their interactions focused on his order. But the man seemed to take her politeness as encouragement. During the dinner rush, Sarah was too busy to worry much about the strange customer. She served families celebrating birthday parties, helped elderly couples choose from the menu, and managed a table of 8 construction workers who had just finished a long shift. The familiar chaos of a busy restaurant kept her mind occupied and made her feel safe surrounded by so many other people. As the evening wore on, however, the crowd began to thin out. By 9 o'clock, most families with children had gone home. The construction workers had paid their bill and left. Mrs. Henderson had finished her usual slice of apple pie and headed home to watch her evening television shows. The teenagers had moved on to whatever Friday night plans awaited them. Sarah began cleaning tables and resetting them for the next day. The man in booth 7 remained, nursing his 4th cup of coffee and watching her every move. She could feel his eyes on her as she worked, making the simple task of wiping down tables feel uncomfortable and stressful. When she glanced in his direction, he would smile in a way that was supposed to look charming but instead appeared predatory. Tony, the evening cook, poked his head out of the kitchen. "Sarah, I'm heading out back to take the trash to the dumpster. The new dishwasher already left for the night. You okay out here for a few minutes?" Sarah looked around the nearly empty restaurant. Besides the man in booth 7, only 2 other customers remained. An elderly gentleman reading a newspaper at the counter, and a young couple sharing a dessert near the window. She nodded to Tony, not wanting to sound paranoid about one customer who had not technically done anything wrong. "Sure, I'll be fine. Most everyone has cleared out anyway," she replied with more confidence than she felt. As Tony disappeared through the back door, Sarah noticed the elderly gentleman folding his newspaper and reaching for his wallet. The young couple was already putting on their coats. Within minutes, she would be alone in the dining room with the man who had been making her increasingly uncomfortable all evening. The elderly gentleman left exact change on the counter along with a small tip, nodded politely to Sarah, and shuffled toward the exit. The young couple paid their check and walked out hand in hand, laughing about something as they headed to their car. The bell above the door chimed as they left, and suddenly the restaurant felt much larger and emptier than before. Sarah tried to stay busy, hoping the man would take the hint and leave. She refilled salt shakers, organized menus, and cleaned the coffee station. But when she glanced toward booth 7, he was still there. And now he was staring at her with a boldness that made her heart beat faster. Without other customers around, his attention felt more threatening. The man raised his empty coffee cup and gestured for her to come over. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then grabbed the coffee pot from behind the counter. She had dealt with difficult customers before, and she knew the best approach was to remain professional and not let them see they were getting to her. She walked over to his booth with steady steps, even though her instincts were telling her to keep her distance. "More coffee?" she asked in her standard customer service voice, already reaching to pour before he could answer. Instead of pushing his cup toward her as most customers would do, the man kept it close to his chest, forcing her to lean across the table to reach it. As she poured, he spoke in a low voice that only she could hear. "You know, you've been working really hard all evening. When do you get off? Maybe I could wait around and we could grab a drink somewhere more private." Sarah straightened up immediately, coffee pot still in her hand. "I'm sorry, but I don't socialize with customers. Is there anything else I can get you with your coffee?" The man's smile faded slightly, but he did not back down. "Come on, don't be like that. I've been watching you all night, and I can tell you're different from other girls who work in places like this. You're classy, intelligent. I bet you're wasted in a job like this." "I need to get back to my other duties," Sarah said firmly, taking a step away from the booth. But the man slid out of his seat, blocking her path back toward the counter. He was taller than he had appeared while sitting down, and now he was standing close enough that she could smell not only his cologne, but also the alcohol on his breath. She realized he must have been drinking before he came to the restaurant, which explained his increasingly bold behavior as the evening progressed. "Don't walk away from me when I'm talking to you," he said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "I'm trying to be nice here, trying to offer you something better than serving coffee to truckers and old people. The least you could do is show a little appreciation." Sarah's training kicked in. She had worked in customer service long enough to know how to handle difficult situations, and she had learned from Jake's military stories that staying calm was crucial when someone was trying to intimidate you. She kept her voice steady and professional. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I'm married and not interested. Now, I really do need to finish my closing duties. Your coffee is refilled, so you're all set." The man laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Married? I don't see any husband around here. And I don't see a ring on your finger either." "Nundy." Sarah instinctively looked down at her left hand. She had stopped wearing her wedding ring to work after Jake deployed because she was afraid of losing it while washing dishes or cleaning tables. The ring was too precious to risk damaging at work, so she kept it safe at home. Now, she regretted that decision. "My husband is deployed with the military," she said, hoping that information might make the man reconsider his approach. Many people respected military families and would back off once they learned about a service member's sacrifice. But this man was not like most people. His expression grew even more predatory. "Oh, so he's not around to protect you. That must get lonely, especially working late nights like this. I bet you could use some company, some excitement in your life." Sarah felt her heart racing, but she forced herself to remain calm. Tony would be back from taking out the trash any minute. She just needed to get through this conversation until he returned. The kitchen was only about 20 feet away, but with this man blocking her path, it might as well have been 20 miles. "I'm going to ask you one more time to please return to your seat so I can finish my work," Sarah said, her voice still polite but with a firmness that made it clear she was not playing games. The man stepped closer instead of backing away. Now, he was so close that she would have to push past him to move in any direction. His smile had completely disappeared, replaced by an expression that made Sarah's stomach turn with fear. "You're not in a position to make demands, sweetheart. It's just you and me here. And I think it's time we got better acquainted." Sarah's mind raced through her options. She could scream, but who would hear her? Tony was outside, and the restaurant's thick walls would muffle any sound. She could try to run, but the man was blocking her path to both the kitchen and the front door. Her cell phone was in her purse behind the counter, too far away to reach quickly. Just as the man reached out to grab her arm, Sarah heard the most beautiful sound in the world: the bell above the front door chiming as someone entered the restaurant. Both she and the man turned toward the sound, and Sarah's heart leaped with relief and joy. Standing in the doorway, still wearing his desert camouflage uniform with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, was Jake Martinez. His dark hair was shorter than when he had left, and his face was more tanned from months in the desert sun, but his warm brown eyes were exactly as Sarah remembered them. He had come home early from his deployment, apparently planning to surprise her at work, but Jake's expression quickly changed as he took in the scene before him. His wife was cornered against a booth by a stranger who was standing far too close to her. Sarah's face showed obvious distress, and her body language clearly indicated she was trying to get away from the man who was blocking her path. In that split second, Jake's military training kicked in. He assessed the threat, identified the problem, and formulated a response. His relaxed posture from a moment before disappeared, replaced by the alert stance of a warrior who had spent years learning to protect others. The man who had been harassing Sarah had no idea what was about to happen to him. Jake took 3 quick steps into the restaurant, his military boots making deliberate sounds against the tile floor. The stranger turned fully around to see who had entered, and his confident smirk faltered when he saw a man in full combat uniform approaching them. Even without knowing Jake's military specialty, anyone could tell from his bearing and physical condition that this was not someone to mess with. "Sarah," Jake called out in a calm but firm voice that carried across the empty restaurant. "Is everything all right over here?" The relief in Sarah's eyes was unmistakable. "Jake!" She tried to step around the man who had been blocking her path, but he shifted his position to continue blocking her way, apparently not yet understanding the gravity of his situation. "We were just having a friendly conversation," the stranger said, trying to sound casual but failing to hide the nervousness in his voice. "No need for any drama here." "Them." Jake continued walking toward them, his pace steady and controlled. During his years as a Navy SEAL, he had learned to read dangerous situations instantly. The man's body language, his positioning relative to Sarah, and her obvious distress told him everything he needed to know. This was not a friendly conversation between customer and waitress. "Sarah, come here," Jake said simply, extending his hand toward his wife. The stranger made a critical error in judgment. Instead of stepping aside and ending the confrontation, he decided to assert what he mistakenly believed was his dominance over the situation. He placed his hand firmly on Sarah's shoulder, preventing her from moving toward her husband. "Like I said, we're just talking. Why don't you find another table and mind your own business?" the man said with false bravado. Jake's expression did not change, but every person who had served with him would have recognized the dangerous calm that settled over his features. He stopped walking about 6 feet away from the man, close enough to act quickly but far enough to assess the full situation. "Take your hand off my wife," Jake said, in a voice so quiet that the man had to strain to hear him. But the tone carried a promise of consequences that made the stranger's hand instinctively drop from Sarah's shoulder. "Your wife?" The man looked between Jake and Sarah, finally beginning to understand that he had made a serious miscalculation. "Look, I didn't know she was married. She's not wearing a ring." "She told you she was married," Jake replied, taking another step closer. "She told you she wasn't interested. She asked you to leave her alone. Which part of that did you not understand?" The stranger's face flushed red, partly from embarrassment and partly from anger at being challenged. He had spent the evening feeling powerful and in control, intimidating a woman he thought was alone and vulnerable. Now he was face to face with her husband, who was clearly not intimidated by anything the stranger might do. "Hey, I never touched her inappropriately or anything like that. I was just trying to be friendly. Maybe ask her out for a drink." "There's no law against talking to someone," the man said, his voice rising as he tried to justify his behavior. Jake's training had taught him to remain calm under pressure and to never let emotions control his actions. He spoke in the same quiet, controlled tone. "You cornered my wife in an empty restaurant. You ignored her requests to leave her alone. You blocked her path when she tried to walk away from you. That's not being friendly. That's harassment." Sarah finally managed to step around the man and quickly walk to her husband's side. Jake immediately positioned himself between her and the stranger. never taking his eyes off the potential threat. Sarah slipped her hand into Jake's free hand, feeling safe for the first time in hours. Sarah, did this man touch you or threaten you in any way? Jake asked, still watching the stranger carefully. He grabbed my wrist earlier when I was taking his order, and just now he was blocking me from walking away when I tried to go back to work. Sarah answered, honestly. The stranger realized he needed to de-escalate the situation quickly. He could see that Jake was not going to be intimidated or talked out of protecting his wife. Look, this is all a big misunderstanding. I'll just pay my bill and leave. No harm done. The harm was already done when you decided to harass my wife, Jake replied. Jake had dealt with bullies before, both in civilian life and during his military service. He knew that men who preyed on women they perceived as vulnerable were almost always cowards when confronted by someone capable of fighting back. This man was no exception. All of his earlier confidence had evaporated the moment he realized Sarah was not alone and unprotected. The stranger reached into his wallet and threw a $20 bill on the table, far more than his coffee and minimal food order cost. He was clearly eager to leave as quickly as possible. There. I've paid. Now I'm leaving. You don't need to make this into some big military operation. You're absolutely right, Jake agreed. This doesn't need to be a big operation. All you had to do was respect my wife's clear requests to be left alone. Since you chose not to do that, I'm going to make sure you understand the situation better. Jake took another step toward the man, and despite being roughly the same height and build, the stranger suddenly looked much smaller. Years of combat training, physical conditioning, and experience in genuinely dangerous situations had given Jake a presence that could not be faked or intimidated. If you ever come back to this restaurant and bother my wife again, we're going to have a much longer conversation, Jake said in the same calm voice. And, if I ever hear that you've treated any other woman the way you treated her tonight, you'll discover what a real military operation looks like. The stranger nodded quickly, clearly wanting nothing more than to escape the situation he had created. He started walking toward the front door, moving faster with each step. But Jake was not finished with him yet. Wait, Jake called out, causing the man to stop and turn around reluctantly. I think you forgot something, Jake said, pointing toward the booth where the man had been sitting. You should probably leave a proper tip for the waitress, whose evening you ruined. The stranger's face went red again, but he walked back to the table and pulled another $10 from his wallet, placing it next to the $20 he had already left. The tip was now larger than his entire bill, which seemed appropriate given the circumstances. Thank you, Jake said politely. Now you can leave. The man practically ran toward the door, desperate to get away from the situation. As he reached for the door handle, Jake called out one final time, "Drive safely. And remember what we talked about." The stranger nodded without turning around and rushed out of the restaurant. Through the large front windows, they could see him hurrying to a luxury sedan parked near the street. He got in quickly and drove away faster than was safe in the restaurant's parking lot. Jake finally turned his full attention to his wife, his stern expression melting into concern and love. He wrapped his arms around Sarah, holding her close and feeling her body relax against him as the stress of the evening finally began to fade. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here," he whispered into her hair. "Are you okay? Did he hurt you?" Sarah shook her head against his chest. "I'm okay now. He didn't hurt me, just scared me. I was trying to handle it professionally, but he wouldn't take no for an answer." "When did you get back? I thought you weren't coming home for another month." "Our mission ended early, and they gave us permission to come home as a surprise for our families," Jake explained, still holding her tight. "I wanted to surprise you, but I never expected to walk into something like this." Tony chose that moment to come back in from taking out the trash, stopping short when he saw Jake and Sarah embracing in the middle of the dining room. "Whoa. Jake, when did you get back, man?" Tony had met Jake several times before the deployment, and had always promised to keep an eye on Sarah while he was away. "Just now," Jake replied, keeping one arm around his wife as he turned to greet Tony. "And I'm glad you're here. There was a customer giving Sarah trouble. But he's gone now. Tony's expression darkened. The guy in the suit who was camping out in booth 7? I knew something was off about him. I should have stayed out front instead of going to take care of the trash. Sarah, I'm so sorry. It's not your fault, Sarah assured him. You couldn't have known he would act like that. And everything worked out fine. Jake looked around the empty restaurant. How much more do you have left to do here? I'd like to get you home if possible. Sarah glanced at the few remaining cleaning tasks. Just a few more minutes. I need to finish wiping down the last few tables and lock up the register. I'll help you, Jake offered. Tony, do you mind if I give her a hand finishing up? Are you kidding? After 8 months deployed, you want to spend your first night home cleaning tables? Tony laughed. Get out of here. Both of you. I'll finish the closing duties. Sarah's been working extra hard while you've been gone, and she deserves to go home early on the night her husband comes back. Sarah looked grateful but hesitant. Are you sure? I don't want to leave you with extra work. I'm positive, Tony insisted. Go home and celebrate Jake's return. We'll see you for your regular shift on Monday. And hopefully, it'll be a lot more boring than tonight was. Sarah quickly gathered her purse from behind the counter and checked to make sure the register was properly secured. Jake helped her with her light jacket and picked up his duffel bag from where he had dropped it near the door during the confrontation. As they prepared to leave, Jake turned back to Tony. Thanks for looking out for her while I was gone. I know it means a lot to both of us. That's what friends do, Tony replied. And Jake? I'm really glad you showed up when you did tonight. That guy was bad news. Jake nodded grimly. Some people only understand one kind of language. I'm just glad I was here to translate. My. As they walked toward the door together, Sarah leaned against her husband's strong arm. Finally feeling completely safe again. The nightmare of the evening was over, and the love of her life was home where he belonged. Jake and Sarah walked hand in hand toward their car in the restaurant parking lot, both of them still processing what had just happened. The cool evening air felt refreshing after the tension inside the restaurant, and Sarah finally began to truly relax as they got further away from the scene of the confrontation. I can't believe you're really here, Sarah said, squeezing Jake's hand. This whole evening feels like a dream now. Well, the first part was more like a nightmare, but having you show up like that. Jake unlocked their car and held the passenger door open for his wife, a gentlemanly gesture he had never forgotten despite years of military training. I've been thinking about surprising you for weeks. The mission wrapped up ahead of schedule, and our commanding officer decided to let us come home early instead of sitting around the base waiting for our official return date. As Jake started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, Sarah studied his profile in the dashboard light. He looked older somehow, more serious than when he had left 8 months ago. She could see new lines around his eyes and a weariness that spoke of difficult experiences she probably would never fully understand. Was it dangerous over there? She asked softly. I know you can't tell me details, but I worried about you every single day. Jake reached over and took her hand again. There were some challenging moments, but my team and I looked out for each other. The hardest part wasn't the danger. Honestly, it was being away from you, missing all the little everyday things we used to do together. As they drove through their familiar neighborhood, Sarah told Jake about the changes that had occurred while he was deployed. Mrs. Peterson next door had gotten a new puppy that barked at everything. The grocery store on the corner had been renovated and now stayed open 24 hours. Sarah's sister had gotten engaged and was planning a summer wedding. Oh, and I've been saving money from my tips at the restaurant, Sarah said excitedly. I wanted it to be a surprise for when you got home. I saved almost $3,000. I thought we could use it for a real vacation, maybe go somewhere we've always wanted to visit. Jake smiled at his wife's enthusiasm. That sounds perfect. I have some leave time built up, so we could probably take 2 weeks off and go anywhere you want. As they pulled into their driveway, both of them noticed a car parked across the street that neither of them recognized. It was a dark sedan, similar to the one the stranger from the restaurant had been driving, but neither Jake nor Sarah could tell if it was the same vehicle in the dim streetlight. Jake's training kicked in automatically. He parked their car in the garage and closed the door before they got out, ensuring they were not visible from the street. "Probably just someone visiting the neighbors," he said casually, not wanting to alarm Sarah. But his eyes continued to scan their surroundings as they walked toward the house. Inside their cozy home, everything was exactly as Jake had left it. Sarah had kept his coffee cup in the kitchen cabinet, exactly where he always placed it. His favorite chair in the living room still had his bookmark sticking out of the novel he had been reading before deployment. Even his side of the bathroom counter had been left untouched, as if Sarah was preserving it until his return. "It's so good to be home," Jake said, pulling Sarah close for another embrace. "I dreamed about this moment almost every night." They spent the next hour talking and reconnecting, sharing stories and simply enjoying being in the same room again. Sarah made Jake's favorite late-night snack, and they sat together on the couch where they had said goodbye 8 months earlier. Around midnight, Jake's phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Tony from the restaurant. "That's strange," Jake said, answering the call. "Tony? Is everything okay?" "Jake, I hate to bother you guys, but I thought you should know. That creep from earlier tonight came back to the restaurant about an hour after you left." Tony's voice was tense and worried. Jake immediately sat up straighter, his protective instincts fully alert. "What happened? Did he try to come inside?" "No. But he sat in his car in the parking lot for about 20 minutes, just watching the building. I called the police and they came by to check it out. But he left before they arrived. The officer said there wasn't much they could do since he hadn't actually broken any laws. But he took a report and said they'd increase patrols around the restaurant for the next few days." "Did you get his license plate number?" Jake asked, already thinking about next steps. "Yeah, I wrote it down when I first noticed him sitting out there. I gave it to the police officer." "Jake, I'm worried this guy might try to follow Sarah home or something. He seemed really angry when he left earlier." Jake looked at Sarah, who had heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. Her face showed concern but not the fear she had displayed earlier in the evening. Having Jake home made her feel secure, even knowing that the stranger might be causing more problems. "Thanks for calling, Tony. You did exactly the right thing. Don't worry about Sarah's safety. I'm home now, and this guy has no idea what he's dealing with if he wants to escalate this situation." After Jake hung up, he and Sarah discussed their options. They could file a police report about the harassment at the restaurant. But as Tony had mentioned, the man had not technically broken any laws. They could increase security around their home, but that seemed like an overreaction to what might be an isolated incident. "What do you think he wants?" Sarah asked. "Why would he come back to the restaurant after you made it clear he needed to leave me alone?" Jake considered the question carefully. Men like him don't like being challenged or embarrassed. He probably went home tonight feeling angry and humiliated, instead of learning from what happened. Some people never learn to accept consequences for their actions. "So what do? We stay alert, but we don't let him control our lives," Jake replied. "I'm not going anywhere for at least the next month, so he'll have to deal with me if he wants to continue bothering you. And I suspect that once he realizes I'm not going back overseas anytime soon, he'll find someone else to bother." Jake's confidence was reassuring, but he was also taking the situation more seriously than he let Sarah know. During his military career, he had encountered men who became obsessed with particular targets and who escalated their behavior when their initial attempts were thwarted. He made a mental note to vary Sarah's schedule for the next few weeks and to escort her to and from work when possible. The next morning, Jake called the police station and spoke with the officer who had responded to Tony's call. The officer confirmed that they had the license plate number and had run it through their system. The car was registered to a man named David Brennan, who lived about 30 miles away in an expensive suburb. He had no prior arrests, but had been involved in several complaints from women who worked in restaurants and retail stores. Unfortunately, unless he threatens someone directly or violates a restraining order, there's not much we can do, the officer explained. But we'll keep his information on file, and if he shows up around the restaurant again, we can have a conversation with him about harassment. Jake also called his commanding officer to explain the situation and request permission to extend his leave if necessary to ensure his wife's safety. The officer, who had a family of his own, immediately approved the request and assured Jake that the Navy would support him in protecting his family. Over the next week, Jake accompanied Sarah to and from work every day. He would drop her off at the beginning of her shift and pick her up when she finished. During her lunch breaks, he would often stop by the restaurant to check on her and to maintain a visible presence that would discourage any unwanted attention. The stranger never returned to the restaurant, but Jake and Sarah did notice the same dark sedan parked on their street twice during that week. Each time, Jake would walk outside to get a clear look at the driver, and each time, the car would drive away immediately. The message was clear. Jake was aware of the surveillance and was not intimidated by it. After 2 weeks with no further incidents, Sarah suggested that Jake stop escorting her to work every day. "I think he got the message," she said, "and you should be able to enjoy your leave time without having to be my bodyguard constantly." Jake agreed, but with conditions. Sarah would text him when she arrived at work safely and when she was leaving to come home. If she felt uncomfortable about any customer, she would call him immediately, and Tony would keep Jake's phone number handy in case he noticed anything suspicious. 3 weeks after the original incident, Jake's phone rang early one morning. It was Detective Martinez from the local police department. "Mr. Martinez, this is Detective Rodriguez. I wanted to let you know that we arrested David Brennan last night on charges of stalking and harassment. A woman in the next county filed a restraining order against him, and when our officers went to serve it, they found evidence that he had been following multiple women and keeping detailed records of their schedules and personal information." Jake felt a mixture of relief and concern. Was my wife one of the women he was stalking? Yes. Her name and workplace information were found in his files, along with photos he had taken of her without her knowledge. The good news is that with this arrest and the evidence we've collected, he'll likely face serious charges that will keep him away from your wife and other women for a long time. When Jake told Sarah about the arrest, she was initially frightened to learn how serious the man's behavior had been. But she was also grateful that he had been stopped before he could harm her or anyone else. "I keep thinking about what might have happened if you hadn't come home that night," Sarah said. "What if I had been alone in the restaurant with him when everyone else left?" "You don't need to think about that," Jake replied firmly. "What matters is that you're safe. He's been arrested, and we're together again. Besides, you were handling the situation perfectly. You stayed calm. You didn't let him intimidate you, and you were ready to fight back if necessary. I was proud of how strong you were." 6 months later, David Brennan was sentenced to 2 years in prison for stalking multiple women and violating restraining orders. The judge noted that his behavior showed a pattern of escalation that could have led to violent crimes if he had not been stopped. Jake and Sarah used her saved tip money to take a 2-week vacation to Hawaii, where they renewed their wedding vows on a beautiful beach at sunset. The experience of facing danger together had made their relationship stronger, and they both had a deeper appreciation for the importance of protecting and supporting each other. Back at Rosie's diner, Sarah continued working as a waitress, but now with a greater awareness of personal safety and the knowledge that she could handle difficult situations. Tony installed better lighting in the parking lot and implemented new policies about closing procedures when female employees were working late shifts. The story of how a Navy SEAL had quietly but decisively dealt with a customer who was harassing his wife became something of a legend at the restaurant. Regular customers would sometimes ask Sarah about that night when Jake came home, and she would always smile and say that she was grateful to be married to someone who would always have her back. Years later, when Sarah and Jake had children of their own, they would tell their kids about the importance of treating others with respect, standing up to bullies, and always being there for the people you love. The frightening incident that had brought Jake home early from deployment had ultimately become a story about courage, protection, and the unbreakable bond between two people who were committed to facing whatever challenges life might bring their way. Jake never regretted the way he had handled the situation that night. He had used exactly the right amount of force necessary to protect his wife without escalating the confrontation into violence. His military training had taught him that the most effective way to deal with a bully was to make it clear that their behavior would not be tolerated, while leaving them a face-saving way to retreat from the situation. The experience also reinforced for both Jake and Sarah how much they meant to each other, and how important it was to cherish the time they had together. Military families face unique challenges with frequent separations and dangerous deployments. But their love and commitment to protecting each other made them stronger than any threat they might face.